From the last video tutorial that we made, we discussed the accounting equation, the accounting elements, and the rules for debit and credit. In this video tutorial, we will journalize the given business transaction. Let's start first with the first business transaction, wherein the owner invested 100,000 cash in the company. Since the owner invested 100,000 cash in the company, what are the accounts that will be affected in this video or in this business transaction? The accounts that will be affected are assets and the capital account. Why? Because the owner made an investment. Nag-invest yung may-ari, meaning its equity is being affected. How? If you can still remember from our last video tutorial, we discussed there that every time there is an investment and there is an income, the equity of the owner increases. And every time there is an expense and drawings, the equity of the owner decreases. Now here, the equity of the owner increases because there is an investment. And we also studied the rules for debit and credit that whenever the equity or capital of the owner increases, it should be written on the credit side. Here, capital, if it increases, it must be recorded on the credit side. So if we're going to journalize that business transaction, we will input on the credit side, owner's capital, how much? 100,000. And then for the debit side, on the business transaction, the owner made an investment of cash. So, ibig sabihin na apektuhan yung ating cash on our chart of accounts. We recognize cash as what type of account? We recognize it as an asset account. Here, cash. And we're using the account title cash on hand. Why are we using the account title cash on hand? Because it is not stated here that the owner or that, yes, that the owner used a check. We are only using the word or the account title cash in bank if we stated that the company or the third party used a check. So we have the rule in accounting that we have, or we should not assume unless otherwise it is stated. Since it is not stated here that they used cash, we're not going to use cash in bank. We must use cash on hand, meaning the cash is on hand. It is easily accessible. Cash is an asset account according to the rules of debit and credit. If you can still remember, whenever asset increases, it must be put on the debit side. So that is why we have debit, cash on hand. Here, we have debit, cash on hand. And again, kapag nagsulat tayo ng debit and credit, remember that accounting is an art. Your credit must be indented. Hindi yan dapat sinusulat ng pantay sa debit. Kasi pag sinulat mo yan ng pantay sa debit, hindi mo inindent, it will be read as if it is also a debit account, which is wrong. And remember always that your debit must always be equals to your credit. Walang scenario or case na hindi nag-i-equal ang debit at credit. Pag nangyari yon, meaning there is something wrong. So, dapat yan, balance. Now, after writing your debit and credit, you must input a brief explanation on what happened to the business transaction. Why do you have a debit, cash on hand? Why do you have a credit, owner's capital? It is because, again, the owner made an investment. When it comes to a brief explanation after the business transaction, pwedeng magkakaiba tayo ng pag-compose ng ating sentence dito. What's important here is that we have the same thought. Okay? So again, the reason why we have debit, cash on hand, kasi po yung owner nag-invest sa cash. Sino tayo? Tayo si company. Ano nangyari sa cash natin nung nag-invest si owner? Nag-increase. Anong account title si cash on hand? Asset. Paano pag nag-increase ang asset? Saan nilalagay? Debit, credit. Debit side. Kaya tayo may debit, cash on hand. Bakit tayo may credit owner's capital? Kasi po nag-invest si owner. Since nag-invest ang owner, anong nangyari sa kanyang capital account, sa kanyang equity account? Nag-increase. Anong sabi sa rules ng debit and credit? Whenever your capital or equity increases, where should we put it? We have to put it on the credit side. That is why we have credit owner's capital. Anong itsura niyan pag nilagay natin sa accounting equation? Ayan. Increase in asset, 100,000. Increase in equity, 100,000. Kung liabilities natin are not affected, so it's zero. So balance ang ating accounting equation. Assets is equals to liabilities plus equity. 100,000 is equals to 0 plus 100,000. Next transaction. The company bought an equipment worth 85,000. Yung company daw bumili ng equipment worth 85,000 pesos. So, anong magiging entry natin dito? The company bought an equipment. So, bumili ng equipment. Anong account title natin dyan? Equipment. Look at your chart of accounts. Equipment. We have here machineries and equipment. Anong account si machineries and equipment? Asset. We have machineries and equipment. Asset account. What happened to our machineries and equipment the moment that we bought the equipment? Did it increase or decrease? Nung bumili tayo ng equipment, ang nangyari sa machineries and equipment natin, machineries and equipment account natin ay nag-increase kasi bumili tayo. So, madadagdagan yan. Tataas. Mag-i-increase. It is an asset account. Where should we put it? Should we put it on the debit side or on the credit side? According to the rules of debit and credit, again, whenever asset increases, we must put it on the debit side. So, meron tayong debit, machineries, and equipment. So, before you proceed to the next business transaction, you have to leave at least one space. And then proceed to the next business transaction. We have debit, machineries, and equipment. The reason why the date column is blank is because it is not stated in our business transaction the dates. So we bought an equipment worth 85,000. So our machineries and equipment increased. It is an asset account. That is why it is written on the debit side. So we have 85,000. So again, remember that whenever you write the amount in the journal, you have to start first on the right side. So you have ones, tens, hundreds, 1,000, 10,000. So you have 85,000. We have debit, machineries, and equipment, 85,000. What should be our credit? It is stated here. The company bought an equipment worth 85,000. Bumili tayo ng equipment. Anong pambili ba ng equipment? Ang pambili ng equipment ay pera. So we have cash. What type of cash? Did we use check? No. So we have to use cash on hand. Cash on hand. Why is your cash on hand written on the credit side? Kasi po, we bought machineries and equipment. Bumili tayo. Nung bumili tayo, anong pinambili natin? Cash. Ano nangyari sa cash natin nung bumili tayo? Did it increase or decrease? Decrease. Nabawasan yung cash natin kasi bumili tayo. Anong account si cash on hand? Asset account. Anong sabi sa rules ng debit and credit? Whenever asset decreases, it must be written on the credit side. So that is why we have credit, cash on hand. Magkano yon? We bought it for 85,000. And then write a brief explanation on what happened, why they have debit, machineries, and equipment, why they have credit, cash on hand. Because you bought an equipment. Okay? You bought an equipment for 85,000. So the accounts that are affected are assets. Yung asset natin, yung machineries and equipment, nag-increase, 85,000. And then, yung cash on hand natin na nag-decrease amounting to 85,000. So, increase in 85,000 plus decrease in 85,000 is equal to 0. Our liabilities are not affected. It is 0. Equity is 0. So, 0 is equal to 0 plus 0. Our accounting equation is balanced. Next business transaction. What if the company bought an equipment worth 85,000 on account? This time you bought it on account. When you say on account, meaning hindi pa nagbayad, nakalista pa lang. On account, hindi pa nagbayad, nakalista pa lang. So bumili ka ng equipment. So ibig sabihin, kagaya kanina, yung machineries and equipment natin, anong nangyari? Nag-increase. Okay? Nag-increase yung ating machineries and equipment kasi bumili ka ng equipment. You bought machineries and equipment, you bought equipment, your machineries and equipment will increase. Anong account si machineries and equipment? Again, it is an asset account. Anong sabi sa rules? Whenever asset increases, it must be written on the debit side. So that is why you have debit, machineries, and equipment for 85,000 pesos. Did you make the payment? Nagbayad ka ba? No. Kasi it is on account. Nakalista daw. So kung di ka nagbayad, anong meron ka? Magkakaroon ka ng utang. What is an utang? It is a liability. What should be the proper account title that we must use here? You bought an equipment on account. Hindi ka daw nagbayad. Nakalista pa lang, meaning you have an utang. Liability. Go to your liability accounts. These are some of the liability account. The proper account title that we must use is the accounts payable. Accounts payable because it is not stated in the business transaction that you provided a promissory note. If you have provided a promissory note, then we will use notes payable. Now, since wala namang promissory note, accounts payable, meaning it is just a mere promise to pay, we're going to use accounts payable. It is on the credit side. Accounts payable. How much? 85,000. Why is your accounts payable written on the credit side? Because, again, bumili ka, hindi ka nagbayad. Anong meron ka? Utang. Ano nangyari sa utang mo? Nag-increase. Anong sabi sa rules ng debit and credit? Whenever your liability increases, you have to put it on the credit side. That is why we put the accounts payable account on the credit side because it is a liability account. And your liability, the moment that you bought that equipment on account, nag-increase ang iyong liability. Next. What is the next transaction? Now, the company paid the equipment bought on account. Yung equipment daw na binili mo, babayaran mo na. So, bumili ka ng equipment, kaso on account, utang ka lang. Oh, we forgot to input the brief explanation. We have to write here, bought equipment on account. Bakit kami debit machineries and equipment? Bakit kami credit? Accounts payable because you bought an equipment on account. For the next business transaction, what happened there is that nagbayad ka na ng utang. Ano ba yung utang mo? Look at your previous transaction. You have debit, machineries and equipment, credit, accounts payable. Now, between the two of them, alin dyan ang liability? Si machineries and equipment ba? No. Machineries and equipment is an asset account. So, accounts payable is your liability account. What you are going to do is to pay for that liability. So, pag nagbayad tayo ng liability, what will happen to our liability? Will it increase or decrease? it will decrease. Now, according to the rules of debit and credit, whenever our liability decreases, where should we put the liability? Should we put it on the debit side or on the credit side? We have to put it on the debit side. So, lagay natin sa debit yung utang natin, which is the accounts payable. How much is our utang? Our utang is 85,000. And then credit is, ano bang pambayad natin ng utang? Ang pambayad natin ng utang ay cash. So, cash on hand. How much? 85,000. Bakit tayo may credit na cash on hand? Kasi po, nagbayad tayo ng utang. Kung nagbayad tayo ng utang, anong pambayad natin? Cash. Anong mangyayari sa cash natin? Kapag nagbayad tayo ng utang, it will decrease. Anong account si cash? It is an asset account. Whenever asset decreases, where should we put it? Should we put it on the debit side or on the credit side? We have to put it on the credit side. That's why we have credit, cash on hand. So to explain this, why do we have debit, accounts payable? Why do we have credit, cash on hand? Is because we settled the liability. So we have here settlement of accounts. Next business transaction. The company paid 8,000 for its monthly rent. So, nagbayad daw. Anong pinangbayad natin? Obviously, pag nagbabayad tayo, ang pambayad natin ay cash. So, ganito, pag nag-journalize kayo, magsisimula kayo dun sa saan mas madaling sagutan. O dito, nakita natin, mas madaling sagutan yung credit. So, lagay muna natin yung credit. So, credit dapat, again, naka-indent. So, cash on hand. Magkano daw yung binayad mo? 8,000. It is 8,000. Okay. We paid 8,000 for its monthly rent. So, nagbayad tayo. Anong pinambayad natin? Cash. Ano nangyari sa cash natin nung nagbayad tayo? Nag-decrease. Anong account si cash? It is an asset account. And according to the rules of debit and credit, whenever cash decreases or asset increases, it must be put on the credit side. That is why we have credit, cash on hand. Well, now, what should be our debit? We paid monthly rent. Nagbayad tayo ng monthly rent. So, we have a consumption. Consumption, gastos, it is an expense account. Para saan yung ginastos natin? Para saan yung expense natin? This is for our rent. So, let us look for the chart of accounts. Under the expense account, look for the perfect account title to use. We have here rent expense. So let's use rent expense. The reason why we're using the word rent expense instead of prepaid rent, which is an asset account, is that it is a monthly rent. So it is a monthly consumption. It is already consumed. It is already incurred. So that is why it is already considered as an expense. We have rent expense. How much is our monthly rent? It is 8,000. And then for the brief explanation, just write here paid monthly rent. Again, the reason why you have debit, rent expense is because you had a consumption. Nagkaroon ka ng consumption for monthly rent, nakapag-incur ka ng expenses, so what happened to your expenses? The moment that you used the monthly rent or the moment that you had consumption or you have incurred the rent expense, ang expense natin nag-increase. And then according to the rules of debit and credit, whenever whenever expense increases, it must be written on the debit side. That's why we have debit, rent, expense. And the reason why we have credit, rent, cash on hand is because, again, nagbayad. Pag nagbayad, what will happen to the cash? It will decrease. And since it is an asset account, it decreases. It must be put on the credit side. Let's have the last business transaction. Sample here is when the company rendered services to customer amounting to 15,000. Again, the company rendered services to customer amounting to 15,000. Nag-render ka daw ng service, ibig sabihin, nagtrabaho ka. Pag nagtrabaho ka, ano magkakaroon ka ng kapag tayo nagtrabaho, kikita tayo. Ano yung kita? That's an income. Magkakaroon tayo ng income. Makakapag-generate tayo ng income. And again, to be clear here, our point of view is that we are the company. So as the company rendered services to customer amounting to 15,000 pesos, nag-render tayo ng service, nagtrabaho tayo. Kung tayo nagtrabaho, magkakaroon tayo ng income. Saan galing yung income? From the services that we rendered. So what should be the proper account title to use here? Under the income accounts, go to your chart of accounts. Under the income account, what should be the proper account title that we must use? We have here service income. Okay. So again, the company rendered services to customer amounting to 15,000. Nag-render ka ng service, nagtrabaho ka, nagkaroon ka ng income. Saan galing yung income? Sa service that you have provided to customer. So what should be the proper account title that we must use? We must use the account title service income. Anong nangyari sa service income natin the moment that we provided or we rendered services to customer? Did it increase or increase? Anong nangyari sa income natin nung nagtrabaho tayo? Tumaas or bumaba? Nag-increase or nag-decrease? Nag-increase. Nagtrabaho tayo, kumita tayo. Ano nangyari sa kita natin? Tumaas kasi nagtrabaho tayo. According to the rules of debit and credit, whenever income increases, we have to put it on the credit side. So we have credit, service, income. How much? It is 15,000. Again, the reason why we have credit, service, income, kasi nagtrabaho tayo. Nagkaroon tayo ng trabaho, kumita tayo. Anong nangyari sa kita natin nung nagtrabaho tayo? Nag-increase. Anong account title? Service income. Saan natin nilalagay ang income kapag nag-i-increase? Sa credit side. Ano naman ang debit natin? So, nagtrabaho tayo, kumita tayo, magkakaroon tayo ng anong ibabayad sa atin ng customer pag nagtrabaho tayo? If we provided them services, they will provide us the payment, which is money, cash on hand. Bakit nasa debit ang cash on hand? Kasi po, nagtrabaho ka. Nagbayad sa'yo si customer. Pag nagbayad sa'yo si customer, anong pambayad niya sa'yo? Cash. What will happen to your cash kung nagbayad si customer? Will it increase or decrease? It will increase. Anong account si cash on hand? It is an asset account. And according to the rules of debit and credit, whenever asset increases, it must be written on the debit side. That is why we have debit, cash on hand, and then credit, service income. For the brief explanation, you can simply write here, rendered services. Again, do not forget your point of view here, or whenever you try to journalize a business transaction, your point of view is that you are the company. Never assume that you are the owner, you are an employee, or you are anyone else. Just stick that you are the company to avoid confusion on how are you going to treat the accounts, whether you're going to treat them as asset, liabilities, capital, income, expense, or drawings.